Good morning. I'm Pastor Ruth Hetland, and welcome to worship. Welcome to St. Peter's Lutheran Church online on this Lord's Day. Welcome guest and member on this 9th Sunday of Pentecost, when we remember that Jesus said to the disciples when they are tossed about in the wind and the waves, "Take heart, don't be afraid, it is I." And Jesus says that to us too. Whatever storms we may be facing, we do not face them alone. The God of Jacob is our refuge. The Lord be with you. This week on Wednesday evening at 6:30 p.m., we have a meeting to talk about Christian education and youth activities for the upcoming months. And also on Wednesday morning is our weekly Bible study over Zoom at 10 a.m. Newcomers are always welcome. You can find the Zoom link on our website. And also on our website, you can find other announcements, including information for how you can give to this ministry of St. Peter's Lutheran Church. The web address is www.st-peters.us. And thank you for your continued generosity.
Christ within, before and behind, Christ beneath, above, beside, Christ every hour, every day, every night, Christ within. Christ
Matthew 14, verses 22 through 33. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me!" Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God."
We are going to show you a video clip now from a movie called 127 Hours. And in this video, Megan and Christy have met a fellow hiker, Aaron, on the trail and have joined him in hiking the canyon. And Aaron has a lot of experience in the canyon and knows of a great place where he can take the girls. And the three of them are shimmying between two rock walls, suspended over utter blackness. And they don't know what's below them. The girls don't. And so they're wavering between being really excited and petrified as they cling to the walls to keep from falling. And Aaron, after they have stopped at a certain point, Aaron says, "All you have to do is remember that everything will be okay." And then without warning, Aaron lets go of the walls and falls into the blackness down. And the girls begin panicking and screaming his name. But Aaron, who has landed safely in the pool of water below, begins singing loudly. And now the girls have to steel their nerves to follow him down into the unseen pool. We'll watch the video clip now.
Home on the train! Why do you put mommy on the train? Hurrah, my sleeping monkey is revived!
There's another guy. He's fine.
Come on! You gotta come down here! Trust me!
Trust you, I'll kill you, Aaron Ralston! Oh, please. You love this.
Hey! Nice job! Megan, you're missing it!
It's amazing!
clip reminds me a little of our Bible story today. The girls were afraid even when they heard Aaron's voice. It was still scary to let go and fall into the water below. And Peter, in the Bible story, even though he trusts Jesus, he feels fear when he walks out onto the water to meet Jesus. Do you ever feel afraid? I know I do sometimes. But then I remember that God has promised to be with me and will help me. And God is with you and will be with you always. Remember that. Jesus loves you so much, and so do I. The professor and pastor, Alice Mackenzie, tells a story of a couple whose wedding she was soon to be presiding at. Jerry was a computer technician in his mid-40s. He had married and divorced 3 times, and after a year of dating a woman named Krista, who was also divorced with an 8-year-old daughter, they decided to get married. But Jerry began to get very cold feet, and when he shared this with Krista, she suggested that he go away for a day to just clear his head. And so he started driving with no destination in mind, and he ended up at a lake. And he got out of his car and began to walk to soothe his nerves. And he came to a bench that looked out over the lake, and he sat down and tried to breathe deeply to try to unravel the knots in his stomach. But as he stared out at the lake, things started to become clear, and he saw that there were 3 distinct knots in his stomach. One was his fear that the odds were against him, that he would just keep repeating the same relationship patterns and he was doomed to fail at marriage. The second was his fear of stress coming at this fragile new family from the outside. Custody stress, job stress, extended family pressures. And the third was the worst. It was the fear that he was just not worthy to have the love of another human being and not worthy of God's love. And so Jerry did a smart thing that day to take time in a quiet place to sit and listen and think about the knots in his stomach. We need that time too sometimes. In our scripture for today, another man looks out over another lake from which he has retreated to pray. Now Jesus, if you remember in our gospel last week, he has just fed the 5,000 with a little bread and a little fish, and he's been going through a lot. He's the Son of God, but those around him don't recognize that. He's been rejected by the people in his hometown. His cousin, John the Baptist, has just been killed. He knows his time is coming, and all the time people are pressing in on him wherever he goes. There's crowds that surround him. But finally, he has found some time alone. Do you ever have times like that when you just need to get alone to think and breathe? I'm reminded of when my boys were very small and they needed me all the time, like little kids do. And I would go in the bathroom and I would shut the door just to have a few minutes of silence. And it never lasted long, of course. They would be there at the door with their little fingers poking underneath the door. And Jesus always has people needing him, so he needs this time alone. And once he is alone, he prays. Maybe he's telling his own fears to God. This is what the Old Testament tells us to do, to surrender all our fears to God and trust not in what we can do, but what God can do. But prayer time never lasts long enough, and soon Jesus sees his disciples in the boat off in the distance. Through the night, the disciples had faced wind and waves on their boat, but the scriptures don't say they are afraid until the early morning. And now when they see Jesus walking toward them on the sea, the scriptures say that they are terrified, and they say it's a ghost. But Jesus tells them not to be afraid, that it is him. And then Peter does a peculiar thing. He says, if it is you, command me to come to the water, to come to you on the water. And I always thought this was such a strange request. I mean, if I had been there, I would have been content, I think, just seeing the miracle of Jesus walking on the water. But Peter was a little more brash, a little more bold. He wanted some of that walking on water himself. And so Jesus says, come. And Peter doesn't hesitate. He hustles out of the boat and he starts walking on the water toward Jesus. And I wonder what the other disciples thought in that moment. Were they jealous when they saw that Peter was actually doing it? That Jesus was allowing him to have this miraculous experience? Did they wish they had thought to ask for a moment like that too? Perhaps as they grasped the sides of the boat, still being tossed about, some of them questioned themselves, who knows what Jesus will grant if we're bold enough to just ask and believe? Who knows? Well, everything is going pretty well until a strong wind comes up and Peter becomes frightened. And in that moment, he starts to sink and he cries out for Jesus to save him. And Jesus does. But as he does, he scolds Peter. He says, "You have little faith. Why did you doubt?" Now notice he never scolds Peter for his request to walk on water. A request that sounds a lot like a dare to me. Lord, if you can, command me to come to you on the water. Doesn't that sound like a dare? I mean, there's only a couple other times when that word if is used with Jesus. The devil does it 3 times to Jesus when he tempts him in the desert. If you are the Son of God, make the stones into bread, call down special privileges from God, worship me. When Jesus is hanging on the cross, people mock him. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. And here Peter joins his voice. If it is you, Jesus, command me to come to you on the water. And Jesus says, come. I wonder if it was because Peter asked for something that didn't require just Jesus, but it required Peter's faith as well. The thing Peter asked for was not something that would only be fulfilled by Jesus, but Jesus and Peter. It was this partnership of faith and courage. And what's also important to notice is that Peter's faith could only take him so far. His doubts set in quickly, but Jesus didn't let him fall. Peter cried out, "Lord, save me," and Jesus reached out his hands and caught him. The passage ends with Jesus and the disciples all in the boat, and the disciples acknowledging that truly this was the Son of God. As I have thought about it, it isn't all that surprising that the disciples don't proclaim this certainty about who Jesus is earlier when they had seen him feeding the multitudes or with the bread and the fish, but it was when they're on the water and they're terrified that they proclaim who Jesus is. And I thought about how many times in my life I overlook God's presence in the pleasant and peaceful times, but I cry out to God desperately when things take a difficult turn. Many of us forget how much we depend on God until tragedy strikes, illness or job loss or the end of a relationship, and suddenly we remember how much we need God. There's an African American saying that we are always either going into a storm or in a storm or coming out of a storm. Followers of Jesus are those who are learning to call on Jesus in all 3 conditions. When our boat is battered by waves, we call on Jesus. When our boat is far from land, we call on Jesus. When our boat has the wind against it, we call on Jesus. Are we going to keep focusing on the wind and the waves, or on that outstretched hand of the Lord? So let's Let's go back to that story at the beginning of the sermon. Jerry sat on a park bench in a situation that he feared was beyond him, that there was no hope for forgiveness. His boat battered by the waves. And he sat there meditating. And he heard the words, "Let them go. You don't need those fears anymore. Let them go." And he opened his eyes, and as he gazed out over calm waters, 3 geese waddled up to him, prodding at his legs with their beaks. And seeing that he had nothing for them, they made for the lake, and one by one they took flight over the water and up into the distance, like squawking blue angels in formation. And he sat and stared at them until they were specks in the horizon. And then he walked to his car, feeling peaceful. That would be a great ending for a sermon, wouldn't it? But we have to be real. Our fears don't usually fly off like that and never return. Our fears come back to us time after time, honking, flapping their wings, sometimes landing in our souls and nudging around to see if we have food for them this time. But fear doesn't stay as long if our hearts are already occupied by someone else who never stands by, just watching us suffer, but walks toward us on the treacherous seas of life. Remember, Jesus is always with you, friends. In the storm, in the pleasant times, Jesus is with you. God's grace and peace be with you today.
Doing what's right, telling the truth, keeping all our promises, helping the poor, loving the world, being kind to everyone. That's how we walk strong, that's how we walk tall, that's how we walk with God. That's how we walk strong, that's how we walk tall, that's how we walk with God and never fall. Doing what's right, telling the truth, keeping all our promises, helping the poor, loving the world, being kind to everyone. That's how we walk strong, that's how we walk tall, that's how we walk with God. That's how we walk strong, that's how we walk tall, that's how we walk with God and never fall. Doing what's right, telling the truth, keeping all our promises, helping the poor, loving the world, being kind to